When you think of the greatest preachers who ever lived, who comes to mind? Maybe it's someone like Charles Spurgeon or maybe John MacArthur. Well, in the book of Acts, chapter 9, we meet a man who would eventually become known as the Apostle Paul, arguably one of the greatest preachers the world has ever known. But when we first meet him in the book of Acts, he's not a preacher. He wrote 13 of the 27 books of the New Testament. He started churches all throughout the Roman Empire, and he spent his life zealously preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. But notice, he was not a perfect man. In fact, in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 9, Paul says this, "By God's grace, I became what I am, and his grace toward me did not cease. Therefore, I am the least of the apostles and do not fit to be called an apostle. I persecuted the church of God. I led many believers astray by my words, and by the way I acted, I tried to destroy the name of Christ." Here Paul says that he is the least of the apostles and doesn't even feel worthy of the title of apostle. Why? Because he persecuted the church, he led people astray, and he tried to destroy the name of Christ. But even with all this, God used him, and God can use us in spite of our faults and our failures. In fact, sometimes he uses us because of our faults and our failures. We'll never be perfect this side of heaven. We will always struggle with sin. We will always fall short of God's expectations. But as long as we acknowledge our sin, we confess it, and we turn from it, God can use us. He's a persecutor. In fact, he's the worst kind of person you could ever imagine, a religious person who uses their faith as a front to do evil. But in this passage, we see that God takes this man, radically changes him, and sends him out as an apostle to preach the gospel to the ends of the earth. So let's look at 3 lessons from Paul's conversion, found in Acts chapter 9. Lesson number 1. Radical life change is possible. Acts 9:1-2 says, "Meanwhile, Saul was still breathing threats of violence against the Lord's disciples. He went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who worshiped the Lord, whether men or women, he might bring them back to Jerusalem under guard to punish them. And as he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed at his feet. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, 'Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?' Now, for years, Saul had been violently opposed to the Christian church, actively seeking to destroy it. But in this passage, we see radical, like an instant life change take place. Saul, who had spent his life hating Christians, ends up becoming the biggest Christian preacher of all time. The old way of life is over, and a new way of life has begun. This teaches us that no matter how far we've gone, no matter what we've done, no matter how much we might have struggled with something in our past, radical life change is possible because it was for Saul. It can also be for us. Lesson number 2. God can radically change anyone. Look at verse 4. He asked, "Who are you, Lord?" And the Lord replied, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do." Notice that before Jesus tells Saul what he must do, he first reveals to him who he is. You see, Saul thought he was simply a religious man doing what he thought was right, but he wasn't. He was a religious man who was blinded by his own righteousness and was actively opposing God himself. Jesus then goes on to call Saul to a new way of life. And the amazing thing is that Jesus doesn't wait until Saul is a good person to call him. He calls him while he's bad. In fact, he calls him at his worst, right in the middle of him actively opposing the church. This teaches us that God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. God doesn't use perfect people. He uses people who are willing. If you want to serve God, don't wait until you feel like you're good enough. Just start by acknowledging your sin, confess it, and turn from it, and allow God to transform you. Because once he does, he will qualify you for whatever he has called you to do. And lesson number 3, God uses imperfect people. As I mentioned earlier, Paul was arguably one of the greatest preachers the world has ever known. So what are you waiting for? Let this passage of Scripture challenge you to live a life that is pleasing to God.